Welcome back. Now, just a few minutes ago, I spoke with the boss of Europe's biggest airline, Ryanair, Michael O'Leary. I started by asking him something that's probably on all of our minds, which is when he thought we'd be allowed to go on holiday again.
I think it largely depends on the vaccination process, Robert, and the speed of vaccinations. We take Boris Johnson's guidance that all the high-risk groups will be vaccinated before the end of February. And if that's the case, and you've vaccinated all the elderly, the nursing homes and people in the NHS, then there should be no reason for any or cause for travel restrictions. And yet there doesn't seem to be any clarity on this issue. We think that people will be confident to book from Easter onwards into the summer of 2021, but it very much depends on the speed and the success of the vaccine programme.
So how much confidence do you have in the ability of the British government to roll this vaccine out as fast as many people would say is necessary?
I think we would have very little confidence in the British government. The succession of U-turns and policy changes and dithering until the last moment does not build for confidence. I think intending visitors to the UK can have little confidence. And all we can do is monitor, I think, the vaccination programme over the coming weeks and hold Boris Johnson to his promise that by the middle of February, they will have vaccinated all the high-risk groups, everybody over 70. In that case, they should be free. There should be no more travel restrictions from the end of February onwards.
Now, in the next day or so, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, is going to announce a new system which says that if you want to come to the UK, you're going to have a test first. You're probably going to have a test when you land. Is that a good system?
No, and I think what we as the airlines, we're essentially going to stop flying if they introduce this system. The problem for us will be nobody will book flights in advance if they're subject to a PCR test within 72 hours of travel. We have to make the decision. Normally we would have 60-70% of the seats sold a month out. But if everybody's going to be told you can't travel unless you have a PCR test within 72 hours, I think people will hold off from making bookings until the last moment, and that doesn't give us enough bookings to be able to run schedules. So I think what's inevitable, if they introduce this mandatory PCR testing, is that the flights and the airline schedules will collapse because there'll be no forward bookings, and essentially the airlines will be grounded again on those routes and between those countries where mandatory PCR tests are required. And so it's a mess.
So just to be absolutely clear, you are saying that if he introduces this, you will simply terminate flights from destinations, it could be, frankly, the whole world, destinations where the British government enforces that testing rule.
I think so, because, I think customers, you will do such damage to customer confidence and to forward bookings. There will be no forward bookings, and we can't run the risk of scheduling flights that will run with maybe 10 or 20% of the seats sold. It's, we're guaranteed to be losing money, and you will do untold damage to the airlines.
Now, you've talked about the importance of vaccines. What do you think about this idea of vaccine passports? Qantas has said you can't get on unless you can prove you've had a vaccine. Will you do that?
No, Qantas have said that on long-haul flights. Look, nobody's worried about long-haul flights. The problem with this is the vaccine rollout itself. The vaccines are being rolled out in priority. So rightly, the elderly, the National Health Service, nursing homes. But take, for example, you have a family of two parents who are in their 50s may have been vaccinated, but you have 4 children who are not vaccinated because, frankly, they're at no risk of COVID if they're in their 20s or their teens. Can the family go on holidays or not? Because only half of them will have vaccine passports. It's nonsense. I think what we need is clarity from the government on at what point in time, once you've vaccinated all the high-risk groups, the over 70s, the health service and the nursing homes, then there really is no requirement for having any travel restrictions thereafter. We see no reason to have flight restriction, particularly on short-haul flights across Europe, where the vaccines will be rolling out after the end of March. But we can't get any clarity from that from Grant Shapps, from Boris Johnson, or from anybody else in the British government.
Now, compared to COVID, we've had this pretty small story, the end of the Brexit transition period. Has the end of the Brexit transition period made any difference to Ryanair?
It has made a difference in the sense that customers are will be facing much more, there are more restrictions on customer movements between the UK and Europe. You can only stay now for 90 days. Passengers, I think, will have a new experience arriving in Europe this summer and going to the non-EU passenger control desks. And there are some more restrictions. But frankly, it's all been overtaken by the COVID restrictions at the moment. And so, people really won't notice the impact of Brexit, I think, until we get into peak summer, when people are travelling to Spain, Portugal, Greece and Italy, and then begin to see the impact of, joining large queues at the non-EU passport control desks, not having the travel insurance, not having the medical facilities that they had as EU citizens. But we haven't seen it yet. But the reason we haven't seen it yet is because it's been overtaken by the mismanagement of COVID by the Johnson government.
Now, all of this is obviously a disaster for the airline industry. But I looked at your share price before we came on air. You're quite close to your 5-year high. What on earth's going on?
I think the markets tend to look beyond the short-term news flow. We recently, before Christmas, announced a new deal with Boeing to take more aircraft. I think there's a recognition that Ryanair will be one of the survivors, the strong recovery airlines coming out of COVID. But the share price is temporary. It moves up and down. I think we will recover strongly once the COVID restrictions are removed. But what we need is some more certainty as to when these restrictions will be removed, and that depends on the successful rollout or accelerated rollout of the vaccine programme for the high-risk groups, as Boris Johnson has promised, before the middle of February.